Velask Guardians, I greet you in the light. Welcome to episode 5 of the YeetaVerita Podcast, where today we are going to chat about the latest and greatest changes from Destiny 2. The most recent TWAB is thick with 3 C'S and has released on October 6th, 2022, and it includes a deep dive into players-submitted questions for the weapons team, addressing some misinformation regarding recent account bans, and more. There is a lot to cover, so let's thunder crash right on into it. The TWAB leads off with commentary from the product security team regarding the most recent wave of account bans. They begin right away before the explanation with an apology to the impacted players. Their job is to protect the players, and this past week, unfortunately, the opposite took place. One thing I've always appreciated about Bungie is their transparency in the wake of human error, and this is no exception. What follows is a slew of information vaguely described on purpose to avoid teaching cheat developers about their systems and insight into what occurred. Ultimately, during the development of one of their cheater detections, a combination of requirements was set for banning a particular class of cheaters. Early last week, Bungie saw an influx in ban appeals and began to investigate. Bungie then identified that there was a problem with the requirements for this new cheat detection and immediately unbanned anyone identified as impacted. Bungie then began reviewing recent security actions in great detail and continued to unban people based on a review of appeals and their own investigations where appropriate. They follow up here with a few noteworthy points to consider when discussing the most recent wave of bans. The number of accounts caught cheating in other ways is much larger than those impacted by the mistake described above. Looking at just this new detection, which itself is a fraction of all security actions that take place, approximately 60 accounts were false positives. This mistake was a result of human error. Bungie worked as quickly as they could to identify and rectify the issue, and Bungie sincerely apologizes for the anxiety and uncertainty that this caused. Unbans begin to occur within 24 hours of the first indication of a problem. Anyone who has appealed against their ban and subsequently been unbanned has received a direct response to their appeal, indicating that reversal. Bungie has several ways of detecting cheating in Destiny 2, and those unbanned were affected by the specific error mentioned above. If a player finds themselves banned in the future, they were detected by one of the other methods. All of this to say, there was a lot of information being passed around the internet regarding the how and why a person may be banned or unbanned, and Bungie took the time here to reiterate some key points about this specific issue. Following that information is the thickest part of the TWAB, the weapons Q&A. Personally, I think this format is awesome. Questions submitted by the community tackled by Bungie's weapons team, and these are all awesome questions too. There's a lot to cover in this section of the TWAB, and while I'm not going to go through every Q&A, here are a few of the highlighted areas that are noteworthy. When the full auto setting arrives for all weapons, Bungie will keep the full auto trigger system mod as an option. There are no plans to remove that mod. What about exotics that have a full auto trigger perk? How will those change? To avoid inadvertently making these weapons stronger in PvP, the goal is to replace full auto with something fun and thematic, but more useful in PvE than PvP. A few examples include Traveler's Chosen, replacing full auto with Surplus. As a reminder, Surplus increases handling, reload speed, and stability for each fully charged ability. Vigilance Wing, replacing full auto with Ensemble, which, as a reminder, Ensemble provides improved handling and reload speed when allies are nearby. And No Time to Explain, replacing full auto with Feeding Frenzy. Super excited about that change. Now, the most noteworthy discussion topic in this TWAB is an upcoming change to Divinity, a polarizing topic in the Destiny community to be sure, as a lot of people are on one side or the other of this particular exotic weapon, but Bungie addresses a few key points regarding the following change. So ultimately, Divinity's weaken will be reduced from 30% to 15%. Now, as a lot of you have figured out, encounters are built around players having access to be able to weaken enemies. Now, Bungie does not believe Divinity in its current form is actually a balance problem. That said, Divinity is incredibly dominant in endgame PvE activity because it trivializes aiming precision weapons and has an extremely high uptime for weaken. The most important issue is Divinity granting 30% weaken doesn't leave room for other weaken sources such as Tether or Tractor Cannon, and Bungie does not want to power creep past Divinity to make things more interesting. Ultimately, and I say this with just about every sandbox adjustment, patch note, tuning change, you name it, percentages on paper always look worse than what they actually end up being in the game. To me, the goal of that change that they are going to make to Divinity is to provide more options for DPS in endgame content that complement Divinity and don't make it the end-all be-all of every encounter. I have a strong feeling that this change will end up not being as big of an impact as the percentage change may suggest, but with all changes that Bungie makes, we will have to wait and see. Next on the list, Bungie is looking at the kinetic damage type as opposed to the slot and targeting changes post-Lightfall to make this a more interesting aspect of how weapons feel. Regarding Adept raid weapons and their viability, Bungie states crafted base raid weapons are flat out better than Adept raid weapons. Bungie is not happy with the current state of that reality, and they have changes coming in Lightfall that give the new Lightfall raid Adept weapons access to enhanced perks. It's worth noting this does not mean full freeform crafting, but there will be more to come on those changes as we get closer to the release of Lightfall in February. Personally, I'm looking forward to see what they have in store for this, as I wholeheartedly agree that a crafted raid weapon with enhanced perks far and away exceeds a Adept raid weapon from the master version of the raid. Bungie does not have any specific plans to add any anti-champion mechanics to existing exotic weapons. The goal of the recent additions was to address some obvious holes in the options available, and Bungie is really happy with how that worked out. Me too, Bungie. Thanks for those wish ender changes. You've made me so happy with those. Not sarcasm, genuinely, sincerely happy. Thank you for buffing wish ender again. That being said, Bungie is building anti-champion functionality into a new exotic weapon in Season 19 and may revisit other weapons later if the need arises. Bungie also confirmed the number of exotics they are working on in Season 19 has increased from 20 to 26. They did not specify which exotics yet, but we will have a lot of changes to look forward to in Season 19. Now, in a mid-season balancing pass, the following changes will be made to both under- and overperforming archetypes. There will be a sizable stability bump for auto rifles and trace rifles, a small buff to critical hit damage on adaptive frame pulse rifles and precision frame auto rifles, slight reduction in the effective range of pulse rifles at low to mid stat values, nerfs to Jade Rabbit and No Time to Explain ease of use, continuation of the Lord of Wolves rework, a small rocket launcher blast radius buff, a glaive damage resistance nerf, sidearm aim assist fall-off buff, sniper flinch rework, very small tweaks to submachine guns that are outperforming their intended ranges, a small decrease to high-impact scout rifle damage, some outliers that have zoom levels outside normal parameters are being brought back in line, Risk Runner PvP arc damage resistance reduction. It will still remain ridiculous in PvE though. And in Season 19, we have an additional list of changes that'll be made, include removing some shotgun randomness, improved hit detection for glaives, reworking and changing nearly 20 weapon perks, and reworking and changing over 20 exotic weapons. Throughout the remainder of this section, there are a litany of questions from the community regarding perk pools, exotic perks, ritual activity resets and how they impact the perks available on a weapon, perk drop rates, and more. Bungie provides a lot of explicit definitions for many common and uncommon weapon perks that are absolutely worth a look, but are really lengthy to cover in this podcast. So definitely take a look at the full TWAB on Bungie.net for all of those details. Next, we have the player support report and the known issues section of the TWAB. So long, Stadia. While Bungie did not have anything in this TWAB to announce specifically, they have been in active discussion about the future of the Destiny 2 Stadia accounts since Stadia's announcement last week that they will be shutting down in January of 2023. Once Bungie has a plan of action, they will share more details with in-game Destiny 2 messages, TWAB posts, emails, and tweets from Bungie Help. To alleviate performance issues in the tower, Bungie has temporarily reduced the population cap to 20 players while they investigate the underlying cause. There is a new deep site focusing update. The first time players focus a Season of Plunder weapon each week with the double perk weapon spoils Pirate Crew upgrade active, the focused weapon will now also drop with deep site resonance. A fix for the Gear Falcon's Hauberk Hunter exotic has been identified and is scheduled to be shipped out mid-October. As Bungie continues to investigate additional known issues, here's a list of the latest issues that were reported in the help forum. When focusing the Herod C auto rifle in the Drifter's inventory, it is incorrectly listed as a 600 RPM weapon instead of a 360 RPM weapon. Tower loading times have increased for all players. Players are losing the Brand Claimer buff even when the timer is still active during the War Priest challenge in the King's Fall raid. Interacting with the Callus statue buttons too quickly in the Duality dungeon can soft lock players from progressing forward with the activity. Players are unable to upgrade the Witch Queen Deluxe Edition on the Epic Games Store. This issue should be resolved by the end of this week. Riven can become invincible in the Last Wish raid with players unable to damage her in certain situations. Yikes. Now, as a reminder, for a full list of emergent issues in Destiny 2, players can review the Known Issues article, and if you're observing any issues, be sure to report them to Bungie's Help Forum. Well, there you have it, Guardians, the latest and greatest from this week's TWAB. I mentioned this earlier, but I highly recommend hopping in to review the TWAB in greater detail regarding some of the weapon perk definitions and changes. There were quite a few definitions provided that really helped to clarify how these perks work, especially for me, and I really appreciated the Q&A format from Bungie and the TWAB as a whole. I genuinely hope we see more TWABs like this in the future because I find that addressing community questions and feedback in this format is really effective. I am your humble Guardian host, Verita Amore, and if you are looking for more content and shenanigans from me, you can find me on Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok under Verita Amore 87. If you liked today's episode, don't forget to leave a rating or review on your preferred podcasting platform. I thrive on feedback and would love to hear from all of you. Feel free to ask questions, suggest improvements, or provide potential topics for future podcasts. You can find additional episodes of the YeetaVerita Podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Podbean, Spotify, and more, and full episodes will also be uploaded to YouTube. Thank you for listening to my podcast, and as we Titans say, yeet on, friends.